Hello, hello, hello. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the next episode of the BFF podcast. I am your co host, Crystal.
I am Kyeesha.
And we're so happy to have you joining us this evening. Let's see. We have talked about so far our friendship and how we became friends. And then we talked about dating in our 40s. And now, first comes love, then comes
Marriage.
yeah.
So, what have we learned? Because we've both been married. What have we learned from our marriages? And we have to say, what have we learned? Because we are also both divorced. So, what have
And
we
you
learned?
were married more times than me.
I was.
Just saying. So she got more experience than I do.
Had things gone wrong? Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, my friend.
No, you have more marital advice and experience that you can share with the peoples. That's what I was saying.
Things gone wrong. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah. So, BFF. Let's talk about it. Marriage. Did you learn the first time? What did you learn the first time being married to a man? Because you were married to a man the first time.
Yes, let's recap for our listeners who may be new. I am what you may consider bisexual. I was first married to my son's father. I like to call that a Hollywood wedding or marriage because it only lasted about 3 minutes.
Wait, the wedding or the marriage?
The marriage.
Oh.
Yes. Okay. We did not end up staying together. I was pregnant when we got married. I was not pregnant when we were engaged. Well, let me rephrase that. He did not propose to me because I was pregnant. I didn't find out I was pregnant until after he had already proposed. So we ended up getting married though while I was pregnant because I was hell bent on if my son was born without being married, he was not going to have his last name. Wait, he was going to have my last name.
So you can't just give your kid whatever last name, or is that state dependent?
I mean, we could have, but I was being stubborn.
Oh.
And I forced the issue. So we ended up getting married while I was pregnant in order for me to be okay giving my son his last name. That was a mistake. That was one of the biggest mistakes. And things I learned from that was you shouldn't force things just because you think it's right. And I can't even say I had a valid reason for that to be right.
How old were you at that time? You were what, like 20?
24-ish?
24.
But I had a lot of old ideals at the time. And that was where some of that came from.
Because you were raised mostly by your grandparents.
Yes. And they were part of the reason I also married him, knowing I shouldn't have. I had found out several things about him, about the way he was. And now don't get me wrong, he's a great guy. He didn't abuse me, physically or anything, but he was a womanizer. And that was a very known fact. He liked women.
He liked the ladies. Gotcha.
He liked the ladies. And I shouldn't have moved forward with marrying him, but my grandparents had forced the issue on me to marry him. He was great on paper. he was what we would consider, he checked off all the boxes. And so I went ahead with it. I also believe that my ex-husband was my karma, because he liked the ladies and I had gone through a long phase where I liked married men. I am not afraid to admit that. Would I ever do that again? No, I swore them off when I got my karma. I feel like that was my karma. And, you know, that's another discussion later on of why I went through that phase at the time and where that stems from. But I took that. I said I would never do that again and moved on.
Okay. Lesson learned.
Lesson learned.
Lesson learned. And then it was another, 10 years? 10 plus years?
Yeah, probably about 10 years. Maybe about 10 years. When I ended up meeting my ex-wife, and her and I worked together at the time. And I can't even, you know, people ask me all the time, what made you do that? Like, what made you decide to marry a woman? And I honestly don't have any good answer for that. I really don't. You know, I don't have some issue that I was trying to work out or anything. I fell in love with her at the time. I was open, and I think that's really what it was. I was open to being in a full-time relationship with a female. Beforehand, I would only be with females like on the side, or like short term. It was more of a physical relationship as opposed to a real emotional relationship. So I was open to that and to actually having a relationship with a woman. And I fell in love with her. It was a very quick courting phase. I sound old using that term, but we didn't date for very long. Well, no, I guess we did. It was like our year anniversary by the time we actually I think we had been dating a year by the time we got engaged. And then we got married a couple months later, had a wedding a year later, actually. So we were already married like almost a year by the time we had our wedding. And we were together for a while. That marriage lasted longer than my first one did. But I don't know if it lasted longer because of circumstances of moving around and things happening. And, you know, we ended up just being together or what. But that didn't end up working either. And I would say a lot of it really had to do with, we weren't compatible, for one. She would even, I'm sure, agree with that. We just weren't compatible. And that had a lot to do with our love languages. We're not meshing. And two, I ended up starting my healing process with my own traumas, and I ended up growing out of love with her. And kind of moving on emotionally from where I was, and figured out we just weren't compatible. So it ended that.
Now
that's a lot.
That is a lot. It is a lot. And you have a son.
I do.
From your first marriage. So how did your son feel with you marrying a woman? Because he was older by then.
Yeah, he was a little bit older. Yeah, he was like pre-teenish, I guess. He was okay because he had been exposed to some of his friends at the time having like two mothers, right? Several of his friends had same-sex parents in the house with them. So he was okay with it. We had the conversation with him. I had the conversation with him about his comfort level with it, as much as you can have a conversation like that with, I think he was like 11, 12 at the time. And her and I set some real boundaries too. You know, he was in elementary school at the time, and I think we had decided that, like, with his school stuff, we probably, I think only one of us would go. We wouldn't necessarily, like, we wouldn't do certain things together. And that was only because of really where we lived at the time. And we just didn't like that. She always would say, our relationship is our choice. And we didn't want to bring any extra or added issues to my son, because of our choice, you know. And I can't say whether that was the right way or wrong way to deal with it, but that's the way we dealt with it at the time. And it worked, you know, because of where we were. So, you know, I learned a lot though from that relationship. I learned a lot from her. I learned a lot about myself. And I would say that was definitely a relationship that changed me. And some would probably say that having a relationship bring out or point out your bad qualities may be a bad thing. But for me, it actually helped me realize how harsh and cold of a person I had become within a relationship, and pushed me to discover why that was. So I thank her for that. I thank that relationship for that. And I feel like that's obviously a relationship I needed in order to do the healing and the growing that I needed to do. Yeah. If that makes sense.
Oh, it makes total sense. It makes total sense because my story is very similar. Very similar with my
Okay, so what happened with your?
So we actually met at work as well. I was a brand new, had just graduated with my master's in anesthesia. So I was new to the operating room. I was new to the facility. And he was one of the first people that I met in the operating room. He also worked in the operating room. Very charismatic, funny. We would talk about music and dancing. We're around the same age. So we had that like 90s kid connection, you know, growing up in the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
And physically, he wasn't my type. He was like the complete opposite. But I had said to myself, I had been with so many bad boys throughout my entire dating history.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, they had all done me wrong and all broken my heart. So the next good guy, because there had been some good guys that had popped up from time and time again, and I never would date them. I said, the next good guy that I meet, I am going to date and marry him, period.
So you already put that out in the universe.
I had already put that out in the universe. And the universe said, we got you, sister. We hear your call. So we dated for, let's see, I want to say like 9 months before I started talking marriage. I think I had started talking marriage pretty early, but I was like, we moved in together. He moved in with me. That's probably when I should have been like,
run.
But I didn't. He has a son, so I became a stepmom, and I don't have any children. So that was difficult for me. But a lot of my stuff, just like your stuff, was like you had realized who you had become once you started doing the healing work. I hadn't even done the healing work yet, so I didn't even realize why I was the way that I was. I didn't know how to be a mom. I didn't know how to be a stepmom. I didn't know where my role was. He's a good kid. I just kind of didn't know where I fit in. He's a boy. I wasn't really used to boys. So I struggled with that, but that was me. That had nothing to do with him. Mm-hmm. And then, you know, living together, and I really should have taken the time to enjoy my new career, my new salary, all of those things. But I was like, nope, good guy, marriage, like that's it. So we did. Yep. We got married the following year, actually. And it was, so I'm a product of a loveless marriage, meaning my parents were not in love. I never really saw hugging and kissing and things of that nature growing up. So I thought, well, they stayed together. You don't need that. Love isn't real. All that stuff we see on TV, even though I longed for it, it's not really real. That's what you see on TV. So to me, in my marriage, I was like, well, we don't need that stuff. Like,
it'll work out.
Right.
It'll work out.
His parents were still together and still are together. But he said growing up, he had seen, you know, they had some difficulties, as most relationships do. But, you know, so both of us were coming from levels of dysfunctional upbringings as far as seeing what a healthy, loving, positive marriage is. So we both had false expectations towards each other because of things within ourselves.
Right.
So, you know, it didn't last long. We, by 2017, he actually asked for divorce, which is what began my spiritual journey and healing and things like that. Because even though I had asked the universe to bring me a good guy and I would marry him, there were still parts of him that greatly resembled all those bad boys I had dated. And so I was literally dating the same person over and over and over again in a different body. It didn't matter that he was the complete opposite, physical wise, as all of the ones I had dated that had broken my heart. I was like, what is wrong with me? Like, what is the deal? So that's when my healing journey actually started.
So what do you feel like you learned from that marriage?
Oh, so much. But I will say the main thing that sticks out for me is trauma. When people say trauma, they automatically think of physical or like an accident, like that type of trauma. But trauma is a lot. Coming out of the vaginal canal is traumatic. So being born is traumatic. But also seeing dysfunctional relationships growing up, not necessarily being supported emotionally because maybe your parents worked a lot, or maybe your parents, you had to be nannified or after school care. So you weren't getting that nurture. That's trauma. So if you don't know your trauma, if you don't know your triggers, if you haven't done work on healing those issues, it's going to come up no matter what he or she, I won't say it because that's just weird. No matter what he or she looks like, sounds like, smells like, if you have unhealed stuff, it's going to come up.
Because it's like the saying goes, hurt people, right? And so we have to go through experiences sometimes, and some people get hurt in the process to learn the lessons that we have to learn. And marriage will definitely teach us some huge lessons about ourselves. So that is our time for today. Thank you for joining us. And I'll ask our viewers again, if you've been married or even in a relationship that just went wrong, what did you learn from it? Did you see those red flags? Did you find that you were a hurt person, hurting others? Put your comments below, like, subscribe. And this is another episode of BFF. I am Kyeesha.
And I'm Crystal.
And we will see you next week.